On Sunday morning, an Israeli airstrike hit southern Beirut, and within hours, it nearly detonated a diplomatic agreement that took months of backroom negotiation to construct. Donald Trump, watching from Washington, went to Truth Social not to defend his ally, but to publicly rebuke him. Everything in today's analysis is drawn from confirmed reporting by CNN, official statements from the White House and Israeli government, an on-record comment from Iranian state media and senior Iranian officials. Before we go any further, let's talk about what is actually on the line here, because it is easy to get lost in the diplomatic choreography and forget that this is about people. Southern Beirut has been struck before. The neighborhoods Israel said it targeted on Sunday are densely populated civilian areas, the same ones that bore the brunt of strikes during the 2006 war. Families live there. Shops open there in the morning. People who have already lived through one war, then another, are now waking up again to the sound of explosions and wondering whether the next one is coming for them. And beyond Lebanon, in Iran, there are ordinary citizens who have watched their country's currency collapse, their savings evaporate, and their access to medicine and medical equipment deteriorate under years of sanctions. For them, a deal is not geopolitics. It is the difference between a functioning economy and continued economic suffocation. To understand why Sunday's strike was so destabilizing, you need to understand the structure of what was being negotiated. The United States and Iran were on the verge of signing a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, not a final deal. Think of it as the letter of intent before the contract, a document that says, both parties agree there is something worth agreeing to, and here is the framework we're going to spend the next 60 days turning into law. 60 more days of negotiation would follow the signing. That is the window. That is the runway. And Trump, publicly on the record, said he wanted that MOU signed on his 80th birthday. Sunday, June 14th. That detail matters, because it tells you the timeline was not just diplomatic. It was personal, and that changes how you read his reaction to the strike. That is what was on the table Sunday, and one airstrike came close to taking it off. Here is the strategic problem the United States was working against. Washington was attempting to negotiate a nuclear framework with Tehran while simultaneously maintaining its security relationship with Jerusalem. Those two objectives are not naturally compatible. Iran's red lines include the cessation of Israeli military action against Iran and its proxies. Israel's strategic doctrine requires freedom of action to degrade those same proxies. You cannot satisfy both simultaneously. You can only manage the tension between them. And Sunday, that management failed. Here is what makes this story operationally significant. Israel informed the United States in advance of the Beirut strike. This was not a surprise attack from Washington's perspective. An Israeli source confirmed to CNN that Tel Aviv notified the U.S. before launching. And critically, that same source confirmed Israel understood the strike might prompt Iran to retaliate with ballistic missile fire on the very day of the potential MOU signing. Read that again. Israel knew. It struck anyway. This is not recklessness in the conventional sense. This is a deliberate signal. Netanyahu's government was telling Washington something specific. We will not subordinate our operational timeline to your diplomatic calendar. We will not pause our military posture because you're close to a deal with the country that arms our enemies. Think of it this way. Imagine you're negotiating a contract with a business partner, and on the day of signing, your lawyer files a lawsuit against one of their subsidiaries, and you knew he was going to do it, but you let it happen anyway. That is not an accident. That is a message. The American president's reaction was the most geopolitically unusual element of the entire episode. Trump posted on Truth Social, directly, in his name, that, quote, this morning's attack on Beirut should not have happened, particularly on what he called a special day when we are so close to a peace deal with Iran. He did not frame it as a concern. He did not say he was monitoring the situation. He said it should not have happened. That is a public rebuke of a sitting Israeli prime minister by an American president who, for most of his political career, has been among the most vocal defenders of Israeli military prerogative. That is the anomaly you should be paying attention to. And there is a second layer here. According to an Israeli source, Netanyahu was urgently seeking a meeting with Trump following the strike. Netanyahu's office denied that report. The denial itself is telling. When a government officially denies that its leader is urgently trying to reach an ally, that denial is almost always managing optics, not correcting facts. Iran's response was not escalation. Not immediately. Iranian state media indicated Tehran had not yet made a final decision on the proposed U.S. framework. Iran's top security official publicly stated that Lebanon is one of Tehran's red lines in any negotiation. Two senior Iranian figures criticized Washington's ongoing support for Israel in the wake of the strikes. But here's what Iran did not do: walk away. That restraint is deliberate. Tehran is watching the U.S.-Israel fracture and calculating. If Israel can crack the alliance publicly, Iran can extract better terms from Washington, which now needs the deal to prove it can still deliver one, despite its allies' behavior. Iran did not blow up the table. Iran pulled up a chair and waited to see what Washington would offer next. That is called leverage, and Israel's strike handed it to them. Pull back from the tactical layer now. What does this moment actually signal at the strategic level? First, the U.S.-Israel relationship is not unconditional, and Trump is willing to say so publicly. That is a precedent. For decades, American presidents have criticized Israeli military operations in private while defending them publicly. Trump just reversed that posture on Truth Social in real time on what he called a historic day. Every regional actor noticed. Second, the Iran deal, if it gets done, will be structurally weaker than it might have been, because Tehran now knows Washington cannot guarantee Israeli restraint during the negotiating window. That is not a marginal detail. That is a foundational credibility problem. Iran is signing an agreement with a partner who cannot control its own ally. Third, the precedent for the next 60 days of negotiation is now set, and it is not a clean one. If Israel can strike a Hezbollah target in Beirut on the day an MOU is supposed to be signed, what happens during the substantive negotiations? What happens when the talks reach the hard questions? Enrichment limits, inspection protocols, sanctions relief timelines. Every Israeli military operation during that window becomes a potential detonator. Now let's name the historical parallel directly. This is 2015 in reverse. When Barack Obama was negotiating the JCPOA, Netanyahu flew to Washington, uninvited by the Obama administration, and addressed Congress directly to argue against the deal. The Obama team was furious. The rupture between the two governments was real in public. But in that case, the American president held the line and the deal was signed. Obama himself, in remarks this weekend, said it was doubtful any agreement that emerges between Washington and Tehran now will be significantly different from or an improvement on the JCPOA. That is a pointed statement, is also, politically speaking, a loaded one. Because if the framework that emerges looks structurally similar to a deal Trump spent years attacking, that creates a domestic credibility problem for the White House that has nothing to do with Iran. The difference between 2015 and now is that the rupture is running in the opposite direction. It is not Netanyahu going around Trump to Congress. It is Netanyahu conducting a military strike that publicly embarrassed Trump on his own birthday. The geometry has flipped, but the underlying problem is identical. Two governments with fundamentally incompatible timelines and threat assessments, trying to operate as a unified front. Let's be precise about what Sunday's events did not resolve. Because the narrative tendency is to make this a story about Trump's anger and whether the deal survives. That framing is too narrow. Sunday did not resolve the internal Iranian debate. Hardliners in Tehran have pushed back on specific elements of the proposed text. Decisions on the peace framework ultimately rest with Supreme Leader Khamenei and Iran's Supreme National Security Council. And the Iranian president himself acknowledged publicly that the internal picture is not unified. A public rebuke of Israel by Trump does not solve the factional disagreement inside the Iranian government. It may soften it at the margins. It does not eliminate it. Sunday did not clarify the terms of the MOU itself. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz was asked directly on Sunday to specify what the Memorandum of Understanding actually contains. He declined. He said more details would be left for future talks. That is a meaningful silence. U.S. and Iranian officials have been issuing conflicting messages on the terms of a potential agreement for days. When the two sides cannot agree on what they are signing, that is not a communications problem. That is a substance problem. And Sunday did not change the oil market math. An energy expert noted this weekend that Americans should expect elevated oil and gas prices through late summer, even if the Strait of Hormuz reopens soon. The market is already priced in the uncertainty. A signed MOU does not unwind that pricing immediately. Ordinary Americans filling up their tanks are going to feel this deal, or the absence of it, at the pump for months, regardless of what happens at the negotiating table. Here are 3 concrete things to watch in the coming days that will tell you whether this moment was a speed bump or a structural fracture. 1. Does the MOU get signed? And if so, what does Walt say publicly about its contents? If Washington signs an agreement it refuses to describe in detail, that tells you the terms are either unresolved or politically unsaleable. Watch what Mike Waltz says, and more importantly, watch what he does not say. 2. Does Netanyahu get a direct call or meeting with Trump? An Israeli source said Netanyahu was urgently seeking contact. Netanyahu's office denied it. If a meeting happens, watch the readout. If no meeting happens within 48 to 72 hours, the rupture is deeper than optics. 3. Watch Khamenei, not Iran's president, not Iranian state media. The supreme leader has said nothing publicly about the proposed framework. His silence is the variable. When he speaks, if he speaks, that is the decision. Everything before that is positioning. If you're watching this and you're asking yourself, will this deal actually happen? Drop that question in the comments. I want to see where this community stands on the probability of a signed MOU in the next 14 days. I will be reading every response. If you found value in this breakdown, subscribe, because this story is not finished. The next 60 days of negotiation, if they happen, will determine whether this becomes a lasting framework or a footnote in the same chapter as the JCPOA's collapse. We will be covering every step of it. Capital Brief, signing off.